Greetings, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. I am your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything aviation. For over 24 years, I flew KC-135s and was on the cadre that created the KC-135 Weapons School, now a division of the Air Force's Weapons School. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we debrief some of the most amazing and intriguing pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. On our show, we listen to their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation events? Our purpose is to show how does the aviation world really work and increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. And some of these stories you're going to hear for the very first time on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. This episode is financed by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. They're extremely detailed aircraft profiles. They're printed on vinyl so that you can peel them off and stick them to any flat surface. They've got a sticky backing to them. We even do emblems of different units and have done a 30-footer for one of our customers that put it up in his hangar. There are 131 ready to print 4, 6, and 8-foot profiles of aircraft from World War II all the way up to the present time. We also do custom aviation artwork. And folks, these things are really, really detailed. A lot of research goes into these things. You can even read the stenciling on the side of the Sidewinder missiles. Go by and take a look at the ready to print graphics or send us a message. If there's an airplane that you really love, you want your name on it from a particular unit, tail code, even a standard weapons load, we can do it for you. Go to wallpilot.com and buy a couple of these prints for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. I've wanted to interview this person for a long time. Today, we have an Airborne Battle Manager, somebody that sits in the back of the AWACS. He was a senior director, not only in the AWACS, but on the floor of the CAOC, giving the thumbs up or thumbs down on operations that were going on in Afghanistan and Iraq. On today's show, we're going to talk to retired Colonel Mark Waite, a senior director in the AWACS and also now doing cybersecurity work. So grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit show as we talk to Airborne Battle Manager, retired Colonel Mark Waite. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Lessons from the Cockpit show. And today we have on a very special guest, Mark Waite, call sign Boner. How are you, Boner? How you doing out there?
I'm doing great, Sluggo. I'm sitting here in San Antonio, Texas, trying to not melt at the current.
Yeah, I'm complaining about being 97 degrees here in Salt Lake City. What is it down there?
That's about 105, and with the, I guess the heat index is probably close to 110 or even more.
Ouch, that sucks. Oh, but it's a dry heat, right?
That's correct. But so is fire.
Yeah. So what I want to do is, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and particularly your background as an AWACS controller and weapons controller. And then let's talk a little bit about Desert Storm and what went on there. And then you've got some cool stories from Afghanistan too later in your career.
I do.
So tell us, what is an AWACS controller, and explain to people what the different stations are inside the back of the E-3 AWACS, because I think a lot of people don't understand. There are, and when I was flying in Medina, there was air surveillance officers, weapons directors, those kinds of things, and mission commander, and you can explain that a lot better.
Okay. Well, background-wise, I grew up here in San Antonio. I'm an Army brat, and currently I live a half mile across from the high school I graduated from, which is something I never would have guessed in my entire life would have happened. But I decided to join the Air Force in 1979. I had opportunities to go to college, but I knew I wasn't mature enough at the time. So I decided to join the Air Force, and I joined the Air Force and I was an air traffic controller. So I was an air traffic controller for about 6.5 years. The first 4 of those was spent in Del Rio, Texas at Laughlin Air Force Base, running the three runways there for pilot training, at a pilot training base. The RSUs of Lariat and Pinto, I can remember it to this day. Yeah. And then I went to Keesler to teach air traffic control because it was the only place I could go where I could get a a job that was like a straight day shift, because I was working rotating shifts as a controller, working in the tower and the RAPCON at Laughlin. So I went so I could get a straight day shift, or at least a steady shift when I was teaching, which allowed me to go to Embry-Riddle at nighttime. I ended up getting my bachelor's degree in about 2 years, applied for a commission 6 times from the inside, and it just never happened. So a buddy of mine who I used to teach with at Keesler, his dad was a Commodore in the Navy, and says, well, why don't you try the Navy? So I applied for pilot training in the Navy and got picked up the first time. So me and my buddy went off to Navy Pensacola to go to AOCS. But I ended up getting nanny-whammied, as they call it. So when it got to be physical time, so my 4th or 5th day there, after having a Marine Corps drill sergeant beat the hell out of me for, I don't know, just a long time. Yeah. Anyway, they had found back in my records that I had been allergic to bees when I was a kid. So it's called an allergy to Hymenoptera.
Oh, no.
So that disqualified me. So, but I didn't think that was quite fair, because there's not a whole lot of bees out in the ocean. But supposedly, and this is what I have heard, I don't know if this is fact or fiction, that the Navy had done away with their allergy program at that time. So having an allergy was something that was not conducive to being in the Navy at that time. So basically, I got kicked out. I got in my car, drove back to Keesler Air Force Base, and 2-star Major General Hickey was the center commander at that time, and I used to run his honor guard. So I kind of called up and said, sir, I'm in a pickle. I need some help. Yeah. And he says, go straight to the flight doc's office. And I said, sir, I don't have an ID card. I don't have anything. He says, go to the flight docs. So I pulled up the gate at Keesler, and they said, are you Mark Waite? And I said, yes, I am. He says, go to the flight doc office. And I went to the flight doc's office. There's an 06 flight doc waiting for me outside. I walked in, and he says, I hear that the Navy says you're allergic to bees. And I says, that's what they're telling me. And he goes, I hereby say that you're not allergic to bees. Signed a piece of paper, put it in my record, and I was no longer allergic to bees. So that helped me clear that off my records. But I ended up coming back to San Antonio for a time, selling computers for a living, and then trying to get back into the Air Force. I tried to re-enlist, but I'd been out over 90 days, and you have to take a 1-grade reduction. Yeah. I had a line for tech, and it was a whole mess. So I just applied for a commission again, and boom, got picked up for a commission. And went to OTS when it was still here in San Antonio before it moved to Maxwell. Did quite well. I ended up being on staff and stuff like that, but it was good to be back in the Air Force, because I really, really missed it on the 9 months that I was out. I missed the sense of belonging, and I missed the mission for more than anything else. I did that, but on my entry application, I said that I wanted to fly, but I couldn't apply for pilot training because I hadn't cleared any of those hurdles yet. So I ended up being selected to become an Air Battle Manager. At that time, we were called Air Weapons Controllers. And I went to Tiny Tot School at Tyndall, went to school there, and then graduated Tyndall, went to Luke Air Force Base to do semi-automated training for quite some, I guess about 3 months maybe. And then back to Tinker to do AWACS training, and that was late 86, early 1987. I take that back, mid 87 to late 87. Started doing my flying career there. When you look at the AWACS, there are lots of positions on the AWACS. Obviously, you start with the flight deck with a pilot, a co-pilot, a flight engineer, and a navigator, back when we still had navigators in the cockpits. When you go back behind that, you have a communications tech and a radio operator. You go back behind that, you have a CDMT, which is a computer display maintenance technician. And then you start having the mission control consoles. And that is, you have the weapons pit that starts right there, which is where the weapons controllers sit. Right next to them sits a senior director who is in charge of the weapons controllers. And then right next to that sits a mission crew commander, which is the major. Usually it's always, I would hate to say that they're all field grade officers still, because I've seen some first lieutenant ACs nowadays, which that's a whole nother story.
Really?
Yeah. So, but
see,
it's
I've
usually
only
a
seen
field grade
majors.
officer as a mission crew commander. Next in line comes the ASOs, and then right behind that becomes the air surveillance technicians, which is a row of 3 mission consoles. Behind that is an air radar technician, so the ART, who runs the radar and makes sure that when it breaks, it gets fixed. So there's quite a few positions. Our typical crew is 24 is what they show, but typically we fly with about 35. And they're typically long sorties. But just like any other flying job, you have to chase requirements. So, and what I mean by that is I had to have so many 2v2s, I had to have so many 4v4s, I had to have so many refuelings. So doing that, and then whatever you can get in the sim that you couldn't get live and stuff like that. So we're always chasing requirements. After doing my initial training at Tinker, my first deployment was to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to Elf One, and I went there to one of the first missions of Earnest Will. That's back when we were escorting the tankers through the Persian Gulf and through the Straits of Hormuz. I was up the day that the Vincennes shot down the airlines. That's another probably about an hour story right there, just going through everything that happened with that. And I have my opinions about that, but they still don't want to hear my opinions. But did
the
Ernest
Navy
Will,
doesn't, or just everybody doesn't?
The United States government does not want to hear it.
Yeah. We'll come to back that one later in another episode, okay?
Absolutely.
That would be fascinating, particularly if you're up watching it, and if you were there during the 87 timeframe, you and I were there together at the Al Umama Hotel.
Yes, we were, with the ball. In fact, the ball is still rotating around Tinker Air Force Base to this day, and we still take it and hide it places.
Oh, do you really?
Absolutely. It still goes on Facebook. You have to follow it on Facebook.
My crew got there right after the USS Stark got hit.
So
which I'm sure is another whole story that you probably were watching too.
Absolutely. The doing the Ernest Will missions, everything, obviously we were relaying messages on guard from U.S. ships in the Gulf to Iranian aircraft over guard, because obviously there was a line of sight issue and we were doing the relay so that we were deconflicting the traffic that way. It was a unique mission, talking to good guys and bad guys at the same time, but we're trying to make sure that they didn't kill each other and cause anything that went any further worse from that.
And people have to remember the Iran-Iraq war is going on at the same time.
Absolutely, and because those Iranian pilots were flying up the middle of the Persian Gulf, going feet wet in the Persian Gulf and feet dry into Iraq, on that little bitty piece of land between Kuwait and Iran that Iraq owns. And it's a very small piece of real estate there. Yeah. It's a long, those were long missions. It was really hard to tell if you were doing any good until the Vincennes happened, and then you go, okay, now I get what we're doing. And it kind of brought it all home. I must have done probably 7 or 8 of those deployments. I mean, because they were little 45-dayers and they just rotate us in and out at the Al Umama. Yeah. From then I went on to fly Southern Watch and Northern Watch. So I flew out of Saudi for that, and Northern Watch out of Turkey, out of Incirlik, with the brass on board. Did that, and then got set on alert. Let's see, sometime in July of 1990, I got sat down on August. Well, no, I take it back. I want to say it's August 2nd. We went over there. I was on the second jet that landed back at Riyadh and went to the Al Umama. Roger Price was the guy that met us, and he was the liaison there at the time. And the Saudis had no idea we were coming. And they says, well, where do we take you? And I said, well, let's go back to the Al Umama. And that's where we went. That's the only place we knew.
Yeah, that was the day he invaded. That was the day Saddam invaded, was 2nd of August.
We had been sitting on alert for, 2 or 3 weeks. waiting for something to happen. And as soon as it happened, we were the first thing smoking going in that direction.
So you guys had some pretty good advance warning that you guys were going to be deployed over there quickly, weren't you?
I just knew I was on alert. I just didn't know what it was for. I could watch the news just like anybody else and do some deductive reasoning.
Yeah.
But that's one thing, being an AWACS crew member, is you watch a lot of news because it typically decides where you're going to end up next. Yes. And I guess it happens that way.
Same for tanker guys.
Yep.
The tanker cruises is the same exact thing, man. You know, a CNN and we're in crew rest, getting ready to go. And you guys are the same way, aren't you?
Absolutely. And so did that, spent some time there. I deployed back to the United States when we knew that Desert Storm was going to happen. And I was really, really bummed that I was coming home, because I wanted to, if I was going to be there, I might as well fight the war and get it done. There was a good reason for that. I didn't know it at the time, but the crew that I was on is not somebody that they wanted flying. So when I got back, they ripped me off that crew, put me on another crew, and I was back in theater in a week on a different crew. And I was, at that time, I was an instructor senior director as a first lieutenant, which was that has happened, but they're pretty rare. Yeah. And I got put in that position, and it was, and then I was so happy that happened, because as a military person, you want to do what you're trained to do. Oh, yeah. And it's always been that way. And my family hates to hear it, but when I see something happening, I go, man, I wish I was there.
Even to this day.
So on the way back, there was a unique situation. We sat at Mildenhall for about a week, because we didn't want to tip any hands with more jets coming in. Yeah. So we sat in Mildenhall for about a week. We got there about 2 nights before the war kicked off to get our clocks adjusted and burn off hours and stuff like that. And then the war started.
Not a bad place to be stuck.
No, that was terrible, I might add. The Bird in Hand. So
what a great place, man.
Everybody knows the Bird in Hand.
Everybody knows the Bird in Hand. My wife and I have actually stayed at that little hotel they have next to it.
From what I understand, it is closed now.
It is. It is. The Bird in Hand is the pub is still open, but the little hotel thing they've closed down.
So
it's a famous place in Air Force history, man.
I'm sitting there looking at my flight log or my hours book. So my first sortie for the war. Well, it depends on if you call what we were doing in Desert Shield War, then because we were getting combat support time for that, but it wasn't. Nobody was shooting at us at that time. So, but they would have if we'd have gone closer.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, I think 17 January was my first sortie.
That's the opening night.
Yeah. And 17 January. I wasn't the first E-3 up. I was on the second or third. And that was we flew, I was on the east orbit at that time. Because when you look at that, there was 3 orbits. There was east, center, and west. And then we had a goalie at that time. The biggest lessons learned from that, just looking at that, is the coordination that it takes to do while you're controlling and handing off from one E3 to another, with all of the radios, with all of the link data, and with everything. That is a art in itself. And it's something that you don't train to, but we all figure it out. And that's one of the first things I learned is like, I was never taught this in school. I was never taught this in training, but it's something that you do. And I knew how to hand off stuff from being an air traffic controller, but handing off all the technical wizardry that goes on between the links and everything else without skipping a beat and losing something, it was a challenge, but we actually made it look fairly smooth. There are times when I'm sure we've porked it away, but we made it look pretty smooth. And that was one of the things I was like, that's probably something we should train. And we never did.
So real quickly, explain to the audience what that passing off means. You and I know what it means, but tell the audience, hey, in layman's terms, this is what this means.
So if you have strike packages that are going past the FLOT, the forward line of troops, and to do bombing runs on Baghdad or whatever their target is. But if you have one guy that's talking to all those strike packages. You have one guy who's talking to all of the air refueling tankers. You have one guy that is doing the check-in controlling. So everybody that's taken off, they check in before they get handed off to their controllers. You have a DCA, which is defensive counter air controller, who makes sure that we don't get schwacked. And you also have another control doing what we call AWACS monitor, which is making sure we don't get schwacked. But that's just the weapon section. So handing off all of those airplanes on all of those radio frequencies, and there's multiples, to another jet to pick it up seamlessly without stepping on each other's toes. And then the air surveillance section has the same exact thing to do with all of their tracks that the weapons controllers are not talking to. All of those other tracks, the bad guy tracks and stuff that's flying out within the airspace, are being tracked by the surveillance group. They have to hand all of those off to the other jet and the links that goes along with it. Yeah. And we have to make sure we're not on the same radar frequency, because we would jam each other. And it's the same with radios and everything else. And the radios turn off. And then you go, okay, I've got it. You hand it off, and then everybody shuts up on one airplane, and everybody starts talking on the other jet. So it's an orchestra that takes a little bit of. I'd like to say that you planned heavily for that, but the situation is so dynamic, it's hard to plan for. You just know that you know what you have to do, and you get it done. So,
yeah, like Helmuth von Moltke said, no plan ever survives its first contact in combat.
That's correct.
The first night of Desert Storm did not go the way we had planned.
Oh, no, not at all. And I think that besides that lesson learned, there is just, you never understand how busy the radios can get. Just people yammering, and everybody's trying to talk at one time. And you can't, the best thing to do sometimes on the radios is just shut up and listen. And sometimes you get more out of shutting up and listening and then talking. That is an art that's a lot of people. My dad probably gave me the best thing that I ever. He says, you have two ears and one mouth. You should be listening twice as much as you're talking.
My dad told it a little differently. The good Lord gave you two ears and one mouth for a reason.
But I learned a lot then about just having to kind of throttle back and settle in and listen to what was going on the radios. And I was a senior director at this time, so I was listening to all of those controllers, all of their radios, and trying to keep my situational awareness up to make sure that I don't screw anything up. So,
you know what I remember about that? You know what I remember about that night, Mark? This is really fascinating. I remember when we took off out of Jeddah, we were refueling Coors, Lone Star, and Michelob, the first Weasels into Baghdad.
Right.
I will never forget how quiet the radio was while we were flying into Lime Pre to pick up the Weasels. I'm like, nobody's talking. What's going on?
We were all MCON at that time. So
yeah, and because I thought they would be telling us, okay, there's threats here, threats there. And it wasn't until my group went through the high EW GCI line where now Saddam's radars are seeing us.
Right.
And Task Force Normandy was striking that radar station at the very first time. The helicopter guys were striking that radar station at the very first time, that the radios freaking exploded. Yeah,
and those helicopters are a real tough they're a tough nut for radio wise and stuff, because the line of sight is such a hard problem with a lot of those helicopters and talking to them and controlling that. And there's a whole lot of radar theory things that you can throw at it that shows you why sometimes it's a big deal.
And they're not flying very high. They were scooting across like at 50 feet, and it was. I'm sure it was tough to pick them out.
So everybody knows what a Doppler radar is, and then there's a regular radar. So Doppler deals with speed. So if it's not fast enough, you don't necessarily see it on Doppler. You can only see it on raw radar. So which is.
Yeah. And you know what? I will never forget the opening night when we got through that high WGCI line and missiles were going in on top of that radar site. I mean, like I said, the radios just exploded. Choctaw, multiple groups of bandits, Fulcrums and F1s, Manny was the bullseye. I think that was in the central, the island there in Tharthar Lake, if I remember right, and one of those weapons, and hearing Rick Tellini's voice on the radar or on the radio saying, push purple 1 now, and hearing all the F-15s check on. And it's like you said, all of a sudden the radios got really, really busy.
And that goes back to when I gave the threat call to Rico. The only thing that you can grab to get a word in edgewise is guard. And the bad thing is I wasn't the only one going to guard at that point, because there was a lot of people who went to guard because that was the only way they could get a word in edgewise.
Yeah. Why don't you tell the Rico story just real quick? It's a fascinating story.
Well, again, we've talked to each other about it, and I could see because as a senior director, I had my eyeballs all over the place, watching strike packages go in. But as the escort, like Rico was doing like that, I tried to pay more attention to them, because that's how my strike packages are getting through those bandits, is if my escorts can go ahead and do something. And I was just watching packages going in and making sure that we were doing the right thing and listening to my guys. And I could see it popped up on the radar, and it popped up as a MiG-29. And I looked at it, and I didn't hear anybody calling it out. I just pulled it out because it was just within 10 miles. And I just pulled out guard, and I said, threat. I don't even remember if it was 140 or whatever, but I just threat. And it was at 10 miles. I told him 10 miles, and I guess it got his attention because he turned around and he ran him into the ground. But anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, that was his maneuvering kill, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was a maneuver kill.
The guy split-assed right into the sand.
He split-assed right on the ground. So, but I mean, I wish it was more exciting than that. But when you sit there and you look at all the other things that was going on, it was a sheer just reaction by me from the training that I've had. And I see somebody just getting ready to get shot. You just got to give a threat call.
Yeah, you got to warn your guys.
I mean, that's all there is to it. It's just, it's not like it was anything that was premeditated or anything else like that. It's just, it popped up in the radar. It's not like I saw that MiG-29 for that long. I only saw it for a couple of sweeps, and it was enough to get my attention.
But look how that changed the flow of what was happening.
That's true. It changed it quite a bit, but it's it's the way it always is, though. It takes one pin to fall in one direction to make sure that things happen in the right direction. I mean, there's a lot of guys that did a lot of great work, and by far, I am not the only guy who did great work out there. Bubba, Luttrell, Sheila Tuning, there's a bunch of other folks out there who have credited kills to them that did yeoman's work and did some really good things. Joe Versace is another one, I believe.
And you know what? One of my lessons learned from that time period is the tanker guys were all in SAC, and we did not play with you guys hardly at all.
No, and that's huge lessons learned from that. But getting the ATO to somebody, think about that. I mean, the ATO was flown to the Navy on a C-2 COD.
Yep.
They put it on a Riyadh, and they'd fly out to the carrier and drop off the ATO.
I remember the Navy guys that we were refueling talking about that too. You know, every day they had an ATO flight that would go in and pick up, you know, the massive piece of paper, you know, because
750 pages of it.
Because they couldn't email it to anybody. They couldn't send it electronically. They had to get 750 pages. I mean, that's bigger than a Tom Clancy book, for crying out loud, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And so when they would give that to us during our mission planning, which is probably 2 hours ahead of the time we flew, but we had a mission planning cell who broke out it all for us, and they would break out most of it onto sheets for us, so we knew what was important. But the senior director, which is what I was, I mean, all of those were broken out for the different positions, for the OCA, the DCA, the check-in controller, the tanker controller, and all of those were broken out for those packages for those guys. And the senior director, my package was the 750-page ATO. So,
and you know what? People don't understand how time-consuming going through an air tasking order with its airspace control order also.
Correct.
And figuring out, okay, here's the important missions. Here's ones we just need to look at. And you guys carrying that big book with you on the AWACS. Okay.
Well,
and like I mentioned, we were in Strategic Air Command. We didn't have guys that knew how to read air tasking orders.
Right.
It was all on the job training. Fortunately, I had come from Kadena, and that's how we did our schedule. So I had learned, I'd only been at Kadena for 3 months though, but I had learned and taught myself how to read an ATO. And my gosh, getting through all of that, particularly for the tanker guys. And then of course, as you well know, the tanker missions would change drastically when somebody got shot down or there was a big change in the targeting, like when the Scuds thing started. Okay.
Scud hunting was not fun.
You know, and I can only imagine what that was like for you guys as the air battle managers and the senior director, trying to direct all that traffic to places where they think the Scuds might be, getting them to their tankers, you know, and the F-15E Strike Eagles and so forth being out there for so long, hunting for these things.
Well, and the mission itself is, you knew it was important and you knew what needed to happen. But again, you go back to, that's nothing that we ever trained for. That's nothing that, well, it didn't even exist.
No.
So that ended up becoming XINT after all of that. When you start looking at mission labels, it become XINT. And that didn't even exist until Desert Shield or Desert Storm.
On-call interdiction. Right. And it stayed that way.
Absolutely.
For a long time. And then finally, I know at the weapons school, they finally said, we got to do something about this.
Well,
we're going to continue to do this.
Well, and you got SCAR now, and you've got all kinds of other mission sets now that they finally said, all right, we do all of these. Let's name them. Let's train to them. Let's do the right thing here. So, but
that all goes back to the air battle managers, okay? Because now your workload just went up big time.
It did, and when you look at that ATO and that breakout, there were at that time, you know, people had laptops and stuff, but they were still dual disk drive systems that you were loading from DOS off a disk and a little bit of Excel. And somebody built a parser program out of Excel that you could put the ATO into, and it would parse it out by mission, or it would parse it out by squawk, or it'd parse it out by lane. And that was a godsend. And our mission planning cell did that, and that was a lot of help. But the biggest part for the ASO out of that was the thing called the Optask link, which is how you do all the link with all that stuff and with all the things that you needed to do with all of the other players in the links. For the SD, it was the Optask com. So where are what radios do I need to be on? Who's on what radios? What are all the code words for the radios? What are the color codes? What are all of the call signs, all of that, it comes in an OpTascom, which is part of the ATO, just like the ACO is. And those are all very, very important things that I think are overlooked when you start thinking about planning stuff, because today it's so electronic and it's so it's people take it for granted now, and it's because it's so automated now, and you don't really have to think about it. You just expect it to happen.
Yeah, expecting it to happen. That's a great point. You know, we were still using whiteboards during shock and awe.
Well,
the tankers, you know, they came out with the new mission planning program. I can't remember what the name of it off the top of my head. And it didn't have anything for tankers in it. And so General Mosley came to my desk one day and he goes, Sluggo, anybody come through that door, they could wipe out 3 hours worth of tanker tasking. I go, I know, that's why I leave that thing locked most of the time. Because we didn't have a computer program that helped us plan missions. That even helped us break out the ATO. We were breaking it out and hand jamming it even in 2003. And finally, somebody said, we got to do this. And some computer company actually made the tanker planning tool that they use now.
Yeah, it's and that's all evolving as well, because as the Air Force tried to get away from, well, at that time it was CTAPs. Then it went to TBMCS, and then now they wanted to get away from TBMCS and go to a couple other different things depending on what mission you did. And those have all kind of fallen on our face. We're still doing TBMCS, the same thing that we probably did 20 years ago, and it's because it's got 49 different tools built into it, and they're all run by different companies, and nobody wants to talk to each other, and nobody wants to share secrets. So,
isn't that the truth? We called it Mr. Tabimicus. Mr. Tabimicus. This is Mr. Tabimicus and what he's spitting out to us today. Okay. But again, there was no air refueling tool inside Mr. Tabimicus.
Nope.
And people were saying, you got to get rid of your whiteboards. And I said, let me show you why we have the whiteboards.
Well, not only that, the whiteboards, and then if you go to the strat cell in the AOC, they live by yellow legal pads. So to this day, they still use yellow legal pads before they put anything in a computer. So
when did you go through weapons school?
Weapons school, I came back from Desert Storm. On the 4th or 5th of March, something like that. I was one of the earlier crews to come back. I had my picture taken with George Bush on the ramp in Oak City as the first 2 jets that came back. And that's still hanging in my room. From there, I got to spend a week at home, and I went to weapons school. My wife was not really that jazzed about it. But I went to weapons school a week after I got back. And then I turned around and they says, well, you're not going out for weapons school just yet. You're going out to get spun up. And I went, oh, okay. Turned around and on that July of 1991, I ended up starting. No, I take it back. No, actually it was I was a July through December guy. So
you're a B course guy.
Yeah. And then when I graduated weapons school, I went to SOS 3 or 4 weeks later than that. So,
I'm sure she was really happy about that.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm very, very lucky to still be married. I've been married 43 years to the same woman. She's been through all of this together with me. So,
yeah, that's outstanding. So you went to the Command and Control Weapons School. Why don't you tell everyone what the Command and Control Weapons School is and what it teaches?
All right. So when I started weapons school, it was the Air Weapons Controller Division at that time. So all it did was weapons control, and it was all about the art of running intercepts and making sure that fighters knew where threats were and how to build a picture over the radio with your voice of what's going on out there in a 3-dimensional way. So teaching that art to do that. The easiest way to equate it is getting a PhD in the weapons control. But at that time, it was very, very focused on the weapons control end And the C2 piece of it was just now starting to probably, I guess, sprout wings and say, all right, this is really important as well. There's a whole lot more to this than just the weapons control. So we started branching out. Our lessons got much bigger during then, because I went back 3 months after I graduated and taught at the weapons school, and helped build some of that. But the weapons school at that time, like I said, was very, very fighter driven, because I was the last class to graduate from the United States Fighter Weapons School, the last class, and now it's the United States Weapons School, for a very good reason, because it's not just about fighters anymore, and it's a total mission. When I went back there to, all it was weapons controllers at that time. When I went back to teach, we brought on the space division. So I brought the space guys on. I did the check out of their syllabus. We brought in the RJs, and we brought in the compass call guys, all into the command and control division. So all of those folks fell under what used to be the AWC division, and it turned into the C2 division. And now it's called the 8th Weapons, the 8th WIPS, now the 8th WPS. So it's the 8th Weapons Squadron. Yeah. It's actually a squadron commander billet now, like all the rest of them are. But that has grown by leaps and bounds. The guys that started it, a guy named Jeep Dunleavy, was one of the integral guys during Desert Storm. And Jeep Dunleavy, God rest his soul, he's not alive anymore, but he helped bring that on. So he did the transition from the Gomers, which were your guys that used to do red air enactment. So he kind of did the Gomer stuff and then transitioned over to the weapons school, and then started the weapons school. Him, Bull Sheets, Lori Robinson, who ended up being, I think you know who Lori Robinson was.
Oh, she's great people.
So Law was one of my mentors. Yeah. One of her people is getting ready to be the Northbound commander is General Greg Gooey. Was actually a student of mine at the weapons school, and now he's getting ready to be the Northcom commander. So there's some good people out there that have come through that school and through that division. The one thing that I think everybody learned throughout all of these, and we haven't gotten past Desert Storm yet, but from all of these, is that command and control was very important, and that the ABMs themselves, even though they weren't pilots or anything else like that, they were pretty important, because they're the glue that held it all together. Absolutely. That finally, I think, really took hold and opened a lot of people's eyes after a lot of these conflicts, especially after OAF. Right after OAF, I can't remember the exact date, but we became rated officers. ABMs became rated officers right about the time of OAF, which drastically changed our assignment process. Yeah, that's the 98, 99 timeframe. Yes. So, and when that happened, I mean, it sure changed a whole lot. Usually when you had a patch, people listened to you anyway, but you weren't just the GCI guy. Yeah. But it really helped that when we became rated officers and we had a seat at the table, and it's made things go a lot better. Again, like I said, it limited our assignment opportunities, but that's okay. So. Yeah, it brought things together, and rightfully so. There was a lot of issues during Allied Force. Yeah. A lot of issues because you had the NATO AWACS, our AWACS, and RSAF, the Saudi AWACS. The Saudi AWACS. Yeah. My crew refueled the Saudi AWACS on its very first operational mission down to the Strait of Hormuz during the 87 timeframe. Oof. Yeah. I even remember the RSAF call sign, RSAF, I think it was 875 or something like that. And They had their colonel on board, and he was flying the mission. Well, he's the only guy that knew how to fly, probably. So, or was current. Probably so. Yeah, probably so. I think he had a seeing eye major in the cockpit with him as an IP. And the funny thing about this, Mark, was they wouldn't let my aircraft commander come to any of the meetings because she was a gal. Yep. we still had, when we went during the first Ernest Wills, our female crew members still had to wear the abayas, and when we were doing Ernest Will, they couldn't talk on the radio.
Yep, I remember all of that, man. Like I said, and I got there, like I said, in the summer of '87, when the USS Stark got hit in May of '87, I think it was.
Yeah,
things were hot up there, right?
Yeah,
I got to tell you something about this too. In a couple of weeks, I'm interviewing an Iranian F-4 pilot.
Good deal.
That lives down in he lives in Southern California. Okay, San Juan Capistrano.
Okay.
And he's the guy that helped plan that mission where they went all the way around to H-3 airfield through Turkey and Syria and back at 300 feet.
Wow.
He's a retired colonel and has his own construction business down there. So it's going to be very fascinating. I call him Colonel Fred. Colonel Fred. I can't pronounce his Persian name, and he just goes by Colonel Fred. And he remembers this time period very well that you were talking about, Ernest Will, the war in Iraq and Iran, because, I mean, they're using chemical weapons on each other, and they're doing all kinds of crazy things.
And, I mean, you could see the smoke in the air while we were in orbit, just flying around out there. You could see the smoke in the air from Iraq and Iran just from all the war going on.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were beating the hell out of each other. So
yeah. And so in a couple of weeks, I'm going to have Colonel Fred on because he's got some amazing stories. And I told him, we're not going to get anything political. Let's just talk about the flying piece, okay? Because he's one of the oldest, most experienced F-4 pilots in the world.
Yep. When I was at Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas, when the Iranians got told to go home because of the Shah and everything, when he was ousted, we had 2 Iranian pilots fly one into the ground at Mox, not on purpose, because they refused to go back. They didn't want to go home because they knew what was going to happen to them. So,
and believe it or not, Colonel Fred had a run-in with the new regime. Yeah. But I told him, I said, we won't talk about that. So it's going to be interesting to find out about that.
I mean, but after Ernest Will and everything, I think my only 2 big things there after that was Just Cause, and then I did the whole Grenada thing. But other than that, those were fairly low threat, except for Just Cause. That was the first time we used a stink bug and talked to them. So
you guys flew out of Tinker and went down off the coast of Panama?
Well, we flew out of Kelly Air Force Base in San Antonio. We sat alert here in San Antonio.
Oh, talk a little bit about that just real quick.
Oh,
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, we flew out of San Antonio, set an alert down here, and went and did that. Guy got on the jet named Buck. I'll never forget him because he had a black flight suit on. Got on the jet, and all he would say was his name was Buck, and he carried a briefcase with him, and there was only one guy who could see the ATO, and well, 2 guys, me and the mission crew commander, because we were the only one with TS clearances, because most people on the jet at that time only had secret clearances. They didn't have TS clearances. So we were the only place that could see the ATO, and I mean, it was very quick. I mean, that was my longest story in my book. That's 23.7 hour long story.
What?
Yeah, we had to land because of the soaps test. We were going to run out of oil. So that's 23.7. We refueled 4 times.
I never heard of that, Mark.
Oh, yeah.
Holy smokes.
That was actually pretty interesting, but watching the airborne go in, just watching the airdrop flow go in and stuff like that, it was, I mean, obviously there wasn't any air threat really, but yeah. But
you still have to manage all of that going in there and out of there.
Yeah, we just
the soft guys are going in with all of their stuff and helicopters. And
yeah.
I just attended a memorial service for the Navy SEAL that got killed during the Just Cause in Panama.
Oh, really?
Yeah. John Connors. He was the roommate of a good friend of mine in college, TC Capoletti, and it's fascinating to hear his team story of going into the airport and the things that went on there.
But I mean, it was a long mission. It was interesting. it was, we hurt ourselves by keeping everything so secret. But
imagine that.
Which we do a lot. But it ended up working out pretty good. So I can't.
A guy named Buck in a black flight suit hops on the plane, huh?
Yep.
With the ATO in a briefcase.
Yep. He was the stink bug liaison.
I wonder who that was.
Or cockroach, whatever you want to call him,
Yeah. Yeah. We just call it the black jet. See that I didn't even think about you guys having to flow down there and watch all that. But man, 4 refuelings, 23 hours.
Yeah.
How long were you guys on station?
The whole time. Because, that'd be a lying. It's probably an hour on each end we weren't on station because we were in transition to, take off and land and stuff.
Yeah. So what'd you guys do? Fly down across Mexico?
Flew right out of out over Corpus Christi, over the Gulf of Mexico, and straight down.
Oh, so you were on the Gulf Coast side, not the Pacific.
Oh, absolutely.
Side. Okay.
Yeah, we were on the Gulf Coast. Because we flown so many drug missions down there, and have for years and years and years, flying out of Rosie Roads and stuff. And that it wasn't anything alarming for an E-3 to be out there. So.
That's another mission that you guys did that was really fascinating. Talk to us a little bit about the drug mission that you guys did flying out of Rosie Roads and,
Oh, yeah, we flew out there.
South America.
We used to have customs guys on board, usually one guy, and we would talk to customs guys as well as U.S. Air Force folks that were doing drug interdiction sorties. We also liked to try to pick up the boats that were coming in that were fast enough moving that we could see them and do that. And then when we'd go feet dry, we'd go into some countries in South America where flying dark and no modes and codes. Nobody knew we were there a lot, except for maybe 1 or 2 people in the government. And we got out there
flying due regard again.
Absolutely. And we got lit up by a Kafir one time when I didn't think we were going to make it, but we made it back home. So
really?
Yeah, we had to finally get in touch with somebody in the government to tell them not to shoot us. So.
Oh, geez.
But
I think it was the Colombians that had Kafirs, wasn't it?
That's correct. That's who it was. So.
Oh, man. Who is this airplane? What are they doing up there?
Yep. And we were dark, so it was an interesting mission. It was a very boring mission. Until something like that happened. But because it's like watching paint dry. You're just waiting for something to happen.
But aren't a lot of your missions like that?
Oh, hell yeah. There's a lot of them that are, especially if you're on a deployment mission, everybody goes, oh, well, everybody just goes in the back and sleeps. No, the radar's up. We're watching everything. We're making sure nobody runs into us and everything. People are awake. The jet's awake and humming, even when we're
8 to 12 hours when you're on station.
For a deployment mission, yeah. Most of my sorties during Desert Storm were between 13 and 15 hours. So, and that's just flight time. So think of crew time before that, crew time debrief afterwards and everything. They were long days, about 24-hour days. We'd fly for 3 weeks straight, and then they'd sit us down for a week. And the week that we sat down, they'd put us in the AOC to sit on the AOC liaison desk, and I'd sit right next to General Horner. And General Horner would steal my chocolate chip cookies that my wife would send to me.
He's the character, but he's a great guy to be with.
He's an awesome.
He's got an incredible sense of humor too.
Oh, well, and he's still kicking. I went to his house about 3 or 4 years ago when I was working for another company as a contractor, and he
down
was
in Shalimar.
Absolutely. And him and the president of the company I was working for a company called HII at that time. And not HII, what the hell is the name of it? Anyway, he's on the board of directors, and he would invite us all over to his house, and it was just a good time. And he gets good use out of his elevator now. So in his house in Shalimar.
I know he's older, but you know what? He would come to our chow hall. We were flying out of King Khalid International Airport, and we were at this. It was like a community college, but they hadn't finished it yet, or something like that.
Right.
Out there near the air base, and he would come to our chow hall and eat and talk to all of us, just for a change of scenery and everything. And I remember him coming and sitting with everybody. Nobody would sit with him. Nobody would sit with him because he's, oh my gosh, there's General Horner. And he actually told everybody, he goes, look, I don't bite. Come on. I want to talk to you guys. And people would sit around him. And years later, I saw him at an AFA convention, and his sense of humor has not diminished at all.
No, he doesn't get around very well anymore, but he's still sharp as a tack.
Yeah. Yeah. His son, John, was my roommate right before Anaconda kicked. Horn Dog. Right before Anaconda kicked off. He was my roommate.
We talked together to weapons school for a while. So
did you? Another great American. His
Absolutely. Son. You said King Khalid, and it jogged a memory. We had some jets out there when they dispersed us a couple of times, and we were going out there to fly, and Scuds started flying, and we were had just gotten on the jet, and one had hit on base. And so we all jumped out of the jet and donned our gear and everything because they went alarm black and everything. And we actually broke open the box and got our 38s out because they said it was small arms fire on the base. And we all took our guns and everything. And it ended up being a small fire on the base, not small arms fire, but, fog of war. But,
I remember that night well because I was flying that night. And all of the tankers, because King Khalid was a huge tanker base. Yeah. And one of the Patriots took out one of the Scuds like right above the runway.
Yeah, it was probably about 400 feet from where we were at. It was loud.
Oh, that must have shaken the airplane like.
Oh, it did. It shook the airplane. We didn't see it happen. We felt it happen.
You're probably in the back of the plane going, what just happened out there? Yeah. But of course, the Patriot comes out of the box going supersonic anyway.
Yeah. So, but that's what made us egress the jet was that. So, but we got out of the jet, sat there. Once everything finally calmed down, put the guns back in the box, got back on the jet, and flew a 17-hour sortie. So,
jeez.
Our hearts were pumping. So.
Oh, I'll bet they were. A very dear friend of mine that was the head of the MPC for the tanker wing there still has a piece of that Scud missile. He picked one up off the runway.
Unbelievable.
When they were doing the FOD walk down, he picked up a piece and put it in his pocket and brought it home with him. He still has it.
But that's pretty much, as far as lessons learned, I guess, radios, doing changeover. Yeah. And it's to come up with 4, I just say that it'd be tough to come up with 4. There was so much learning going on because we hadn't done anything like that ever in a long time. Yeah. So to nail it down, when you take it back to training, those are some of the things you got to look at. So.
Yeah. And see, our training in the tankers did not match what we were doing at all. No. Okay. We didn't know how to fly VFR. Our own pub said you will fly your missions IFR to the max extent possible. And conventional wars is VFR to the max extent possible. And we didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah, we were flying at 330 hours a month, and they'd have to sit us down. So everything was wavered, but even that one they wouldn't waver. So because that was wavered as far as it would go already anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So where were you on 9/11?
On 9/11, I was in ACSC. I was sitting in the big blue bedroom in Air Command and Staff College. We had just come out of our seminar room. We were going to the bedroom. They announced it, and we all went back to our seminar rooms. We looked and watched TV, watched Fox News for a while, and the base went into Delta. Yeah. So we didn't get home for like 12 hours after that. because some really not so bright person says that, well, all the brain trust of the United States Air Force is at Maxwell, so they're going to target Maxwell. And I was like, you've got to be. I won't use a language like I did, but
I think we all understand what that term was.
Yeah. But
YGBSM.
Yep. So, and then the next day we all got together and we met up in the blue bedroom, and the 3-star came on, and we all said we all want to go home. We quit, the whole class. And
really?
He said, yes. And he says, we want to be a part of this. We quit. We don't need to be here. We need to be with our units. And he says, what y'all need to do is shut up and color and keep going to school. This will last longer than you'll be here, so don't worry about it. And that was probably some pretty prophetic words at that time, not prophetic words that I wanted to hear.
Yeah, because you ended up going to Afghanistan, didn't you?
No, actually, from there, I went to, of all places, to the ACC staff.
What did you do there?
I was the E-3 FAM. So I was the E-3 functionary manager, writing orders for him to go back and forth to the desert, to go to OEF, OIF, go everywhere. And then Gooey Geo, the guy that's getting ready to be the 4-star at Northcom, him and a guy named Squeak Henry, who's a retired 06, a very good guy working for Northrop Grumman now. We're doing comp plans for all of OEF that was getting ready to kick off. So there was a lot of planning going on in the staff level. Mm-hmm. So a lot of planning, but those two did a lion's share of it for the AWACS. Yeah. And I got to do a lot of deployment orders and stuff like that. And then after that, that all kind of died down. I ended up going in 2004, I went to the 605th Test and Eval Squadron as a DO. And tested all things TBMCS, all things DGS, DCGS, all different things like that. Then I became a squadron commander at the 505th Training Squadron, which is the schoolhouse for the AOC. I did that. And then...
Is that at Hurlburt?
It is at Hurlburt. I spent 8 years at Hurlburt, where I got to spend maybe 2 of it at home. And then... after my command tour, I went to be the deputy dog, and as soon as I hit deputy dog, I pinned on 06, and they said, you're going to the desert, and you're going to be the chief of combat ops at the 609th AOC in Qatar. And that's where I did all my Afghanistan, was from the AOC. From the
AOC.
With Mushtarak, Cop Keating, and the Afghan elections, which it was a very, very busy time. Oh, my
gosh. Oh, was it ever?
So Mushtarak was the big push from the Marines, the Brits, and everything in the South. And I went to Afghanistan for 2 weeks and helped plan all that from the air campaign side. And then came back and we executed it. Cop Keating was on October 3rd. Yeah, I believe, because that's my daughter's birthday. That's why I remember it.
Yeah.
Had a bunch of guys make Medal of Honors there. Had a whole bunch of guys get disciplined from that.
Really?
Oh yeah. There were court martials that happened after that from leadership perspective for things that were not done right.
Tell everybody what happened at Cop Keating. A lot of people don't understand what happened there. I do, because there was like a lot. There was several medals of honor. I think it's like 6 or 7.
Yeah. At Cop Keating, it's the Battle of, what was the name of the place? Kamdesh. That's it. It was in the Nuristan province. The guys got ambushed by the Taliban in there, and they're down in this valley.
Yeah.
So it was tough to get anybody to them. It was tough for radios to hear them. And I learned a very valuable lesson that day just from an AOC and a combat ops guy. We had one forward air controller. We had one FAC down there, and he was actually a combat controller, come to find out later. But there was a combat controller and a forward air controller down there. And they got they got pinned down out there with all their guys, and they were having their asses handed to them. So the only thing we could do was start putting more air power on top of them. So we did. We had a CAF stack, I don't know, probably stacked 10 or 12 high. We had tankers at our disposal. And this is where me and Mikey Flynn, well, we didn't personally get into it, but I had a severe disagreement with him that the J-Stars was a command and control platform and not an ISR platform. And he really disagreed with me.
General Mike Flynn?
Yep. And so I said, well, you need to talk to my two-star. That was General Hogue at that time, Boss Hogg.
Yeah.
But General Hogue, and they duked it out for a while. But the pattern of life that they had built up on somebody with the J-Stars, it obviously took precedence over us guys having guys getting killed. I mean, that's the decision that those guys get to make. But yeah. I wanted to move with J-Stars down there for radios more than anything else, because with them down in the valley, we couldn't talk to them. And so we were using F-16s, A-10s, or whatever to relay messages and talk to get down in there. And what I believe we did, and I could actually probably almost say but I'll say we, because it wasn't just me, but I think we overwhelmed them with too many aircraft. So as a lesson learned there, I think we threw too much at them. So
a 12 stack, that's a lot of weapons. That's a lot of CAS.
And you got one dude running it who's getting shot at.
Yeah.
And I mean, those guys are superhuman heroes, but that's still a lot. Yeah. And so finally we got some Navy help in there and some stuff in there that had some airborne fact guys help, and that helped out some. But I just think we threw too much at them, and that's one of my lessons learned from that operation, is that you can, as much as you feel you're doing good, you can also overwhelm people with what you do at them.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, it's just like the killing roads in Kuwait. I mean, we threw a lot at that, and we probably overdid that a little bit too.
Yeah, it's a highway of death.
Yeah. But so that's one of my things from Top Keating. So
what did people get disciplined for? You mentioned that. I know there was a lot of errors that were made during that time period.
I don't know I just know what I've seen that's Googled is that there was a lot of punishment dealt out to leadership on some poor decision making, because supposedly they weren't supposed to be there, but some leadership had told them that they needed to go there. So,
and you know what? You're right. The J-Stars overhead that place would have been the perfect radio relay.
Yeah, and if you Google Cop Keating, there's all kinds of stuff on there. There's some good YouTube stuff. I mean, there's some really good stuff out there. But my personal recollection is I believe we overwhelmed those guys, and the guys that were getting the medals of honors were doing yeoman's work. So. Oh yeah,
yeah. Didn't they make a movie about that too?
They did. They sure did. I got lucky enough that when I was the commander at the AOC school, and then when I came back to be the group commander of the AOC school and all that, I got to teach that lesson from a personal perspective, which I think really helped a lot with our joint audience, seeing that, hey, Air Force guy gets it.
I still teach Anaconda at BYU ROTC Det 855, which is where I went to school. I went through that Det, and I tell everybody, it's the senior class. I do it for 2 days. Right. And I tell them about the planning and then the execution. And I've got some of the gun camera footage from one of the F-15Es. And I tell them, you guys have to become joint officers, because you're going to be in joint fights from now on.
Right.
There's no way the Air Force is just going to go out and do something on its own. All right. Understand how the Navy does its business. Understand how the Marines do their business. Cadets looked at me like, really? Really? And I go, oh yeah. Yeah. You have to be joint war fighters now. And particularly if you're working at an air operations center. So
I mean, and then my other, I guess, hurrah was from the Afghan elections, the first Afghan elections, where we had 64 hours of troops in contact
Oh my gosh.
With 48 aircraft delivering 60 weapons at that time, with over 80 ticks. With
my gosh.
23 were open concurrently. And a couple of us worked that whole thing. There's a guy that's in Dallas right now. He works for Texas Instruments. He was a reserve F-16 guy and did AOC stuff. And he did the yeoman share of all that. And it's basically nobody went home. So when it was shift change, everybody went, nope, we're staying.
Yep. Yeah.
We got stuff going on. This is too important. And so out of 3 shifts, I think all of them stayed for about 24 hours and made sure we got it done right. So
but 23 ticks going on, 23 troops simultaneously, troops in contact.
Yeah.
And all of the CAS that you have to provide, that's a lot.
Yeah, it was
massive
a lot.
Amounts of coordination, getting people in, getting people out, getting them to the tanker, getting them home. I mean, oh my gosh.
To that time, that was the busiest it had ever been. I don't know if that record's ever been broken or not. I don't know that it's a record that anybody wants to keep track of. But that was probably the biggest push I've ever been a part of. So,
but you know what, Mark? I don't think anybody's ever heard that before.
Yeah.
That on the day of the elections, the Afghan elections, all of this air power is actually putting warheads on foreheads to protect the people that are voting.
Absolutely. So, and basically what we did is we had where the polling stations were, we had more Preds and Reapers and everything else. And God, you name an ISR asset, it was airborne that day. And
people don't understand the coordination that goes into doing that.
Yeah, and sending pictures back to the AOC. I mean, we watched it all happen. And you'd see them start moving towards the polling places or try to go start harassing people, and we'd make sure that they weren't harassing them anymore. And I think that's another lesson that most people that I think I still think about to this day. And I mean, God, that was 2009, 2010. So that's been a bit. But when you're sitting there watching that happen and you're calling in airstrikes and you're doing that stuff and you're watching a guy on a motorcycle that's in the middle of a tick and he's the target and you're watching him drive a motorcycle and then you watch him go away. I mean, those types of things happen every day during something like that. And everybody goes, well, it's really cool that, the capability of that. And I said, yeah, it's really cool, but it's not something you want to watch every day. And that's why we have so much problems with our Pred and Reaper guys that
absolutely, Mark. All the stuff that they've watched over and over and over again.
And then they go home and try to be normal because they're at home.
Yeah.
At least I was removed from it. Yeah. And I spent a year away so that I had a chance to decompress when I got home. I mean, they got home and they got kids and a wife and stuff. And then they have to go back and see it the next day. And it's a tough thing. And I mean, those guys, like I said, do great work, but man,
I read a great book by a guy by the name of Mark McCurley. It's called Hunter Killer. He was one of the squadron commanders of, at that time, it was a Reaper and a Predator squadron.
Right.
And he talked about that. He talked about, a crew being in the box, taking out a high value target and then going home and not being able to talk about it to their family, realizing that they just took out like a really bad guy and his entourage. Mm-hmm. In real time on a video, and the PTSD that those guys.
And everybody goes, well, he wasn't in the crap. Well, yeah, he was.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, just because he was in Las Vegas doesn't mean he was there.
Absolutely.
Being
the guy that makes those decisions brings it a little closer to home as well. So.
I didn't even think of that. You had the thumbs up, thumbs down decision, didn't you?
Well, the 2-star did, but sometimes it gets delegated.
Yeah,
and it does, and it's just like on the killing roads in Kuwait. I mean, those decisions were made on the jet. So,
Hey, you mentioned a name a little bit ago. You and I have a lot of people in common.
Okay,
Squeak Henry.
Squeak Henry, yes,
he was a
very good friend of mine.
He was a first lieutenant at Kadena when I was there.
Yes. So I got to Kadena. Well, you and I just missed each other at Kadena.
Yeah, we did, didn't we?
Because I was there in 96, 98. And
I left in August of 95.
So Squeak was another one of my students at the weapons school.
Uh-huh.
And then he came to work for me at the when I was the wing weapons officer at Tinker. And he worked in a wing weapons shop that time. Squeak took one for the Air Force too. And let me tell you that story that he won't tell and nobody else will. It's the first time when passive detection got put on the jet.
Uh-huh.
And it was a new position on the jet. And we needed somebody to do that knew what the hell was going on, as opposed to some second lieutenant that's fresh out of training who doesn't understand what passive detection is and why it may be important. And Squeak took one for the team and did that and stood that whole program up and made it hum and become worthwhile and become tactically relevant.
Yeah.
So
and Squeak is that kind of guy. He was really good. Even as a lieutenant, he was really, really good.
Absolutely. And so kudos to him. He took one for the team and everybody just looked at it like, well, why is he doing that? Well, it was the right thing to do and he did it. And the Air Force and the AWACS community needed him to do that, and he did it. And the weapons school needed him to do it because now we got guys going through the weapons school that have that experience level, and they needed those tactical lessons. So when Squeak went back to be an instructor, he brought all that with him.
Yeah.
So.
And he's a movie star.
Well, he is a movie star.
Yeah, he's in one of the.
What the hell was the name of that movie?
He's in one of the Transformer movies.
Yes, the Transformer.
He's the guy that's calling out when they're in the desert. He's the guy that's calling out the threats. Yeah. And remember, I told you there's voices that I will always remember, and Squeaks was one of them.
Oh yeah,
that's why he's got his nickname. He's got kind of a squeaky voice. That's where he got his nickname, his call sign. Okay. And when you heard Squeak's voice on the radio, you knew it was Squeak. And I remember sitting and watching the movie. Okay. And I can't remember what I was doing. I wasn't paying a lot of attention to the movie. And I heard his voice and I looked up and there was Squeak in the movie calling out threats. And I go, yep, I know that man. And he's doing a great job.
So yeah, he's a good friend of mine. It's a shame we've lost contact other than through like Facebook or something like that. We've just lost contact, and he's doing great work for Northrop Grumman right now. Yeah. So he's doing the do for them, and I know he's enjoying his life with his kids in Missouri. So
yeah, and the other person that you and I know is Spitter.
Spittick.
Yeah,
Marty Spittick.
He was my boss at Kadena.
Yeah,
he was running the weapons shop at Kadena when I have an OPR signed by Spitter. Yeah, he was a great mentor to me when I was there.
Yeah, Spitter was a good mentor to me as well. We did a lot of work together when we were on staff together for a little bit of time, and but he's good people and.
Loves his boat, man. Loves his boat.
That hadn't changed any either.
So. No, he was sailing even when we were at Kadena.
Yeah.
He had a sailboat that he'd take out of Kadena Marina and do stuff there. And when we stood up our weapons school, when we were trying to stand up the KC-135 weapons school, La Robinson was the commander of the command and control, the C2 school. Right. And she did all kinds of stuff for us. So, she was great.
Well, she did what she did because of who she is. And everybody goes, well, it's just because she was Johnny Jumper's exec and everything. That had nothing to do with it. No, that didn't. That woman deserved every bit of what she got.
Yes. And anybody that has worked with Lori Robinson understands that.
Yep.
Okay. She's Jumper's exec. Okay. Irregardless, she was really good at the things that she did, and she deserved being a 4-star general. And I was so glad to see La Robinson become a 4-star general and do 4-star things.
Well, and the GUI coming up behind her. So GUI was Law's baby to bring up. So,
good.
He is every bit the right person to be doing that as well.
Good, because if he's anything like Law, then we're That's a good
We're
thing.
in good hands. That's right. We're in great hands.
Yeah. The current guy, Fats Van Erck, was a F-15 pilot at Kadena when I was there. I knew Fats well.
His name is very familiar, but see, like Fingers Goldfein.
Yeah.
CQ Brown, who's the chief of staff right now. I mean,
soon to be the chairman.
Magoo Walters. All those guys, we all taught at the weapons school together during the same time. So all these GOs I see now, and I was like, we all used to teach at the weapons school together.
Yeah.
So, but it was a good group of folks then, and they've gone on to do really, really great things. So, and
that's one of the things that I so loved about being part of the weapons school, even though we weren't validated yet, because everybody's like going, what in the world is a tanker weapons school going to teach? And now we've been going for 23 years and I have, I think, over 220 grads. That was painful standing up the KC-135 weapons school, because we had people at Nellis that wanted us and didn't want us. All right. The first commandant we dealt with was Sergeant. General Sergeant.
Yeah. Okay.
And we'll just leave that there.
We'll leave there. Yeah.
But
because he was a commandant when I was teaching there for a while. So.
Well, and the next one was Bert Fields.
I know. I love Bert Fields.
I do too. Okay. And when we came to him with a proposal, we said, look, can you let us go through the core classes and then let our students plan and execute all the air refueling needs for mission employment, now advanced integration? And he goes, and so we got our foot in the door kind of that way. And it was a good thing for us. But
so now
we knew it would take a war to get us validated. And unfortunately, 9/11 happened when our third class was going through.
Yeah. So I'm mentoring young cyber weapons officers. Yeah, I do cyber work now for the Air Force. So I'm a civil servant now, and I'm a test director in a 346 test squadron, and I do all the testing on offensive cyber weapons. So
that's very fascinating. Tell us what you can about what offensive and defensive cyber weapons are.
Defensive cyber weapons, I'll put it, I mean, you could get into a very push glasses up on forehead discussion real quick.
Now there's a term I haven't heard in a long time.
But defensive is obviously you don't want them in your network. Mm-hmm. And offensive is you want to be in their network and you want to be doing bad things in their network.
And if people knew what those bad things were.
Yeah, that's as far as I can go.
Well, the only time I've ever seen something written that really kind of let that cat out of the bag was when the Israelis went and bombed a nuclear reactor near Deir ez-Zor, Syria, back in September of 2006.
Right.
And not only how we did it from the ground, but how they did it from the air, network attack from the air. And there was a great Der Spiegel article, and there was also a couple of articles that came out in Aviation Leak and Space Technology, as we call it, not Aviation Week, that probably went a little too far.
There's a lot of things that go too far, and if you read between the lines, you can get a lot out of it. But yeah, it still doesn't scratch the surface. So
no, and those of us that have worked in AOCs, I remember the first time that I was exposed to that, I was stunned what the Special Tactics Office and other things do, and that's some pretty cool stuff, particularly when you tie it in with all the space stuff that's going on.
Yeah, that's one of the so I get offered lots of jobs to go work in different places for
different people,
obscene amount of money, but mostly as a contractor.
Yeah.
And I've done that before, and I've got that T-shirt.
Yeah.
I'm very comfortable being a government employee now, and there's the biggest reason why is I get to tell people when they're doing something stupid, and I couldn't do that when I was a contractor. And I am not afraid to tell somebody that something is stupid. So.
But see, the great thing, Mark, is you have the experience and expertise to back that up.
Oh, I do. But the thing is they still don't want to hear it, but they have to hear it. So as a contractor, they didn't have to hear it. Now they have to hear it. So
yeah, man, there's so much we could talk about in the cyber space arena that,
so I've got a very wide and very
you really do.
Load.
You really do. That's why I enjoyed having you on, is because, I mean, I didn't know that you started at Navy pilot training at Pensacola, and came up through the Air Battle Manager and everything.
So that's why the ABM career field right now is one of the most in-demand career fields there is, because everybody wants some of it. And the reason is because they're not experts at everything, but they know something about everything. And they're great generalists. Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own expertise, but they're great generalists that can speak to a lot of different things. And that's because you don't have to worry about offensive. You don't have to worry about defensive. You don't have to worry about links. You don't have to worry about comm. You got to worry about all of that.
Things. Yes.
And then you learn from that, and that's why they're in high demand. And we're going through just like the pilots do and the navigators do, is with the bathtub effect that we have when they shut the schoolhouse down or whatever. Yeah. And there's a shortage. And the bad thing is it's with the job market the way it is right now. It's even harder in what I'm doing now for a living, trying to keep a young first lieutenant or a captain who's been trained to do amazing things, that there are civilian companies who will pay them a lot of money to do and get to stay at home. It's very tough to compete nowadays. And just on the cyber realm, it's really, really hard. So, in fact, that's one of the things they're starting to do with the government employees now, is they're starting to bump the pay if you're in a cyber career field now, to at least give you some incentive to stay, because even the government civilians are walking because it's just too lucrative. Yeah. So when you sit here in a town like San Antonio, where they like to call Cyber USA, because it's always been Military USA, now it's Cyber USA. Because you got AT&T, you got USAA, you've got Amazon, you've got
there's a lot of companies in San Antonio.
There's at least 20 of them. Yeah. And they're all competing for the same amount of guys to get trained right here and then stay here for most of their careers. Mm-hmm. It comes time for them to re-enlist. I mean, and we're talking to the enlisted and the officers, because the staff sergeant, tech sergeant, enlisted guys are way experienced and way educated themselves. So
yeah. And see, I've always looked at the air battle managers as the true joint warfare people, because they truly had to be joint.
I didn't mean to get us off track there. But.
No, that's okay, because that was a good discussion. That was really good information, because you look at what's going on around the world now with cryptocurrencies and all the different things that are going on in the cyber world. When I was going through school, there wasn't any curriculum that I know of that was teaching me that kind of stuff. Cyber warfare, cyber offensive, defensive warfare. And look where we have come since you and I got in the Air Force in the 80s to where we're at now.
Oh, absolutely.
Where network attack is huge. And what does everybody say if we go to war with China? It's going to start as a big, massive network attack.
So before I moved into doing this job in cyber, my first job after I retired was working for the 624 OC to operationalize their operations center in the cyber world. Brought on by a Colonel Al Berry at that time. He was one of the first commanders of the cyber OC. And he brought me on to do that. And that's how I got my start in cyber, was doing that. And that's, everybody thinks of net attack and stuff like that. That's 10% of what happens in cyber, and the other 90% is defensive. So it's the sexy stuff that gets people's attention.
Oh, yeah. And it's, portrayed in movies. Yep. Wrong. When I was going through school, when I was going through college, a lot of people were getting computer science degrees. because computers
Oh,
are
yeah.
starting to be a big thing. And now that has gone from computer science now to cyber and network. And as you mentioned, the links, keeping the network going. And I remember doing we did an exercise with the Navy when I was at Kadena, where the rivet joint, the ES3 shadow that was on the Independence,
Right.
the AWACS, and the E2, we had like a link exercise that lasted about an hour and a half during this big exercise that a bunch of us put on. And the first day that didn't go well, okay, because we didn't do that a lot. And the second day it went much better. And they were feeding stuff into the network and the cyber world back then. And this is in the 90s. That was pretty amazing. And now we're, eons beyond that.
Yeah. It's
And the information that is shared so quickly. Anyway.
So the only thing I missed going through my notes here, bud, was in between a lot of those missions, and before I did the OC thing, I did OAF, excuse me, Allied Force.
So where were you flying? Were you there flying in the AWACS?
Yeah, I was flying an AWACS out of Geilenkirchen, Germany.
Those were some crazy missions.
Yeah. So, those were exciting too, but for a lot of weird reasons, they were exciting. And it was just dealing with the NATO environment was good, but it was challenging. So, and it all had to do with clearances and everything else like that. That we had to fight that probably more than anything else.
I was at Vicenza during OAF.
Oh, well, then you know all about it. So.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. But it was good, and that I just didn't want to show myself unemployed there for a certain amount of years.
So were you assigned to Geilenkirchen at the time?
No, I had just gotten out of mission crew commander training. I went to become CMR, and they said, "You're CMR now. Get on a jet. You're going to OAF." And I went, "Okay."
Yeah, Geilenkirchen's not a bad place to get stuck either.
It was. It's really nice to fly for a long time, do good work, and I come home and have a beer and go to bed.
So I was at Vicenza for a little while, then they sent me out to, and they had one of the NATO AWACS that was on alert on a pad there that would fly missions every once in a while. And I got to go up with the NATO AWACS. That was really fascinating. We had a Spanish aircraft commander, a German co-pilot, and I think the mission crew commander was a Danish guy in the back. It was really fascinating to be up on that airplane. The key there is if you do get assigned there, it's probably one of the best places to get assigned in AWACS because you get every nation's holidays. And every nation's beer.
Absolutely. So.
But see, some of those OAF, some of the Allied Force missions were pretty intense.
Yeah, when the guy got shot down.
Vega 3-1, the guy in the F-117.
I came up after he got shot down, so we were all in search and rescue mode. And then there was a shoot down that happened when I was airborne. I was not on the jet that controlled that, but a couple of things that happened there. It depends on which orbit you were in, on how much action you got. So
yeah, we had the last kill of the war was an F-16 that was at Alviano.
Right.
As tail number 353, a guy named was Dog. I remember I saw the airplane the next day and they had already had the star on the side. And
you remember his last name? Because
it's Gacy or something like that.
Yeah, I know him. I'm trying to remember why I know him.
Gacy or something like that.
But anywho.
Yeah, that was Rico talked about the first night and he and Dozer getting kills. And I just remember when I was at the Vicenza, the restrictive ROE, certain nations wouldn't allow you to do certain things.
That followed into OEF as well. So depending on which forces were in contact is dependent on which set of ROE you went by. Yeah. And we had Brit lawyers, we had NATO lawyers, we had all kinds of lawyers. And I tell you what, those lawyers on the floor, when you get a good one, you can't do without them. Because they're
going to save your butt.
Yeah, when you get a good one, and I preface it by saying that because I know a lot of them that are good and are still in the Air Force, but they never let them stick with that, because that operational law is such a niche, place to be.
Yeah.
And those guys are really good when they're doing it, and then they just don't let them stay in it, and then they put them somewhere where it doesn't matter. And then, because like at the 624OC, the lawyers that we have there, that's a whole nother separate issue with cyber law and stuff like that. And those guys will save your butt.
And think about what you just said, cyber law.
Yes. And it's a
cyber
thing.
Law. No one have ever thought of that.
It's a thing.
in the run up to the war for shock and awe, we had a gal who was a colonel who was the lawyer on the floor, and she was fantastic. Fortunately, she didn't mind getting in a few of the fighter pilots' faces and going, "Don't do this."
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And people don't realize how important, when you're not at a full up war state, how important that lawyer is that knows international law, but understands the kill chain at the same time.
Absolutely.
I remember her several times, going, I'm going to give a thumbs down on this one. Her decision stopped us from doing something that probably could have gotten us in some trouble, particularly with what was going on at that time period where Iraq was concerned with the WMD and, does he have it? Does he not have it? All those kinds of things. Yeah, I understand about how important that lawyer on the floor, that operational knowledge of not only lawfare, but also the kill chain, how important that is. Hey, brother, we've been going for almost 2 hours, man.
Yeah. Well, I hope I didn't bore you.
Not at all, man. This is all really good stuff. Again, thanks for coming on, man. It's been great to have you on the Lessons from the Cockpit show and talk to you about all of this. I've not talked to a Airborne Battle Manager yet. Again, look at the jointness of what you've done throughout your career. It's like me and a tanker guy, I've got 10 cats and traps on 8 aircraft carriers. Who would ever have thought that?
Well, yeah.
Look at the things that you've done in the joint arena through how many wars? 4?
A few. Yeah. And so when I was at Udied, and we'd have to fly out to every time we got a new carrier in the Gulf, we had to have to fly out. So I've got a couple of traps and everything myself to brief.
Those are exciting, aren't they?
Yeah, the new crews that are going up the alley into Afghanistan. So there's a lot of that, and that's some pretty unique stuff. And like you say, the jointness of that. And I mean, when I was a second lieutenant, I went through Airborne Early Warning School, which was a Navy school. And I was like, what the hell is this doing any good? Well, I'm glad I did, because it sure did help later on in life. Yeah, it did. Thanks for coming on the Lessons of the Cockpit show, Mark, and sharing with us your background, okay? Absolutely. I hope you really enjoyed this episode, number 64 of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. Man, there's a lot of good stuff in this episode. Cyber warfare and cyber law. Who would have ever thought that? This episode is brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are profile views printed on vinyl, 4, 6, and 8 feet long, that you can peel off and stick on the walls or any flat surface. We also do unit emblems. There's 131 ready to print profiles right now when you go to wallpilot.com that you can pick from World War II aircraft all the way up to the modern F-35. If you want, we can do a custom order for you also of your favorite airplane with your name on it, the unit it's from, tail number, and even the weapons load, a custom weapons load on it. These are really detailed, and please, folks, go by wallpilot.com and take a look at some of these things. Order 1 or 2 of them, because that's what finances the show and keeps us going. This and previous episodes of the Lessons from the Cockpit show can be found on my website at markhasara.com under the podcast pull-down box. Over the next couple of weeks, trying to nail down the Iranian F-4 pilot, Colonel Fred. I was in Boston recently, met a major general who flew the SR-71 in 3 assignments, starting from test pilot school. He was the only first lieutenant that had been through test pilot school, and he had flown C-9s as his first assignment. We're also going to have on a major general who started out on the C-9, went to test pilot school, and had 3 tours, 3 assignments in the SR-71. That's going to be a really fascinating episode also. Folks, I really appreciate you taking the time to come to listen
To all my listeners, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to come and listen to these episodes. I'm really learning a lot, and I've really enjoyed being with a lot of you people. Met somebody the other day in a store who said, "Oh, I know who you are. You're Mark Hasara, the host of the Lessons from the Cockpit show." That was pretty gratifying. Thanks for coming by and listening, and we will talk to you again next week on the Lessons from the Cockpit show.